Welcome to Andy Ari On3. Happy 4th of July week. It is a deep dive week. We did this a couple weeks ago when Ari and I took a little time off. Doing it again, where we pick one team per day and we dive very deep into that team. And Ari, today we've got a team that we have absolutely not talked about enough this offseason. And I think it's probably because this team has just been very successful over the last few years, and we just assume they're going to continue to be good. But I think there are a lot of questions to ask, and I think how good is a legitimate question with Georgia.
Just funny. Go Dogs. I just like saying that. Yeah, it's so funny because we're in the interesting business, and just being consistently the best all the time is not interesting. What's interesting is fighting to be the best. And I think part of the reason that we don't talk about as Georgia as much as we probably should is because we just accept the reality of their greatness. But I do think that it is interesting to dissect what they're going to be this year, and also in the scope of the way that they're built for the future of the sport, because they aren't defending national champions. And I'm not sure many people have them number one or even number two overall going into the year. So is Georgia going to come back down to earth, or is Kirby Smart going to continue his trajectory to try to be the next Nick Saban? I think is an interesting thing to dissect. And we've got a very, very smart person to help us do that. Jake Rowe from Dawgs HQ covers the Bulldogs. What's up, Jake? How we doing?
I don't know about that smart comment, Andy. I cover Georgia. That's what I do. We'll debate intelligence another day.
I'm excited about this because we had some requests, because we had some listeners who were like, listen, guys, I'm a Georgia fan. You don't talk about Georgia at all. What are you doing here? And it's exactly what Ari said. They're always good, and I'm not sure always good is all that interesting. And there's always, all these other programs that have weird things happening or they go up and down. Like, Georgia's just good, but I'm curious from your standpoint, because like on your message board, good's not always good enough. Like they got that taste of those national titles, and they're like, no, we want that over and over.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's so hard to just kind of keep winning them like that. And, I thought the 2023 season that Georgia kind of exceeded my expectations because, Carson Beck comes in as the first-year quarterback, and you're thinking, yeah, they don't have a whole lot of holes or anything, but how good are they going to be? Like, how good are they going to be after going back-to-back? And they were awesome. And then, they get some injuries at the wrong time, and, you end up having to go into, I guess you kind of ended up paying the piper for the John Mechie and Jamison Williams injuries by Ladd and Brock kind of being almost, not themselves at all. And Ra Thomas being completely out of that 2023 SEC championship game. They lose to Alabama, and then there it goes. They don't get a chance to play for anything after that. So, then you roll into last season, and it was just, man, it was a grind. Last season was such a grind for this team. They didn't play a whole game. They barely played whole halves of football. But then you look down, they're SEC champions, and they're talking about how they're getting healthy and how they are as healthy as they've been all year. And then Notre Dame just kind of, blows them up front on offense, so they can't get anything going. So it's definitely, this is not as steady as you would think it is from the outside. Like, you start looking at records and you're like, man, this team has been so consistent and so steady. Man, these last two teams have just been so different. But at the same time, I understand why from a 10,000, 20,000 foot view that it might look a little bit boring, but the fans, man, they expect you to fight for it and challenge for it every single year. And I think this team still has a chance.
The thing that Andy and I always talk about was Nick Saban's comment that the second Georgia gets the right person, it might be time to get out of here. And Georgia did get the right person. And I think that there was this dialogue or expectation that Georgia, having won 2 national championships with Nick Saban in the sport, was going to be the new dynasty, was going to have the new coach that was going to, win a bunch of championships and put himself in the position to be as accomplished at the end of the road as Nick Saban was. I think we're finding out, and we probably should have always known this, that what Nick Saban did at Bama was pretty unbeatable. But I think that Kirby Smart would have had a better chance of actually doing that had the sport not changed, right? Like if you just kept going status quo, accumulate top 1-2 classes, stack your roster, have 2 deeps that are better than most other team starters, and just run that way. That would have gone, but the sport has changed. What, Jake, is your perspective of what Georgia can be, not just this year, but moving forward in terms of a dynasty? Is it harder for them? Are they as equipped as ever? What's your thought on that?
You jump all the way back to pre-NIL, pre-transfer portal, all of that stuff. When guys like Quinnen Williams were playing one snap in the national championship game, starting the next season, and then becoming a top 5 pick. Like, right. If you go back to that time, I think Georgia had a reasonable shot to kind of build a dynasty. But then you kind of there's another era that comes after that. I think what Georgia did, winning 2 back-to-back national championships in the transfer portal era, in the NIL era, barely. There was some. That was impressive. In the playoff era, impressive. But now, no shot. There's no shot Georgia or any other team is going to pick up the mantle that Alabama laid down when Nick Saban retired and walk with it, because now the playoff gauntlet's way too hard. The transfer portal is what it is. And I mean, even if you get to the point where you're locking guys in for 2 or 3 years of contract stuff and you can actually get them to stick around, the ability to get them during rev share with money exchanging hands and all of that stuff. And not only that, but a playoff that's getting bigger, and that it's gotten bigger and it's just going to get bigger. Yeah, that's a pipe dream. Now, if somebody does it, I'll just have to, hop on here and you guys can make fun of me, but it's just not going to happen.
No, I agree with you. I'm with you.
Yeah, that's what I put the list of Georgia's defensive line 2 deep from 2021 in a column and said, this will never happen again.
Never.
On one team.
Yeah, I mean, it's in Alabama, folks say, well, Alabama did it. Yeah, man, Alabama did it when these guys had to get releases and then they were told where they could transfer.
Right.
And they had to sit out a year. Like there was hurdle after hurdle after hurdle. There were so many reasons not to transfer that. All of the power was in the school's hand. If you take it back to that time, sure, like some of those things are going to happen. You're going to get some of those, you stack together some of those defensive and offensive lines, but that's not the way of the sport anymore. And I don't really have a problem with that. Like I don't have a problem with it. Like it was cool to see that kind of talent emerge on one team. That was fun. I'm glad we got to see it. But now that is one area where I'm like, hey, if a player's not playing and like Nick Saban loves to say, increasing value for himself and creating value for himself by getting on the field, then that player needs to go. Now, I do take issue with the fact that some teams have gotten really good at going and buying players off of other teams' rosters. That's unprecedented. We don't even see that in the NFL. I mean, I can imagine how nasty the NFL would be if you could do that. So, I think that needs to be put a stop. A halt needs to be put to that. But ultimately, yeah, you're never going to stack talent like that again. And it's just oftentimes I think what's going to come down to these new playoff things, whether it's 12, whether it's 14, 16, however many they are, it's just going to come down to who gets hot at the right time, because that's playoff sports, football, baseball, basketball, it doesn't matter. And 2, who can stay healthy. Because, you can't in this era, if you're not going to be as deep as you used to be, you better stay healthy, because you're just not going to be as good as the team that is healthy.
Yeah, that said, we did get a text from somebody that was at the Rivals camp the other day, and they said, hey, you guys are going to be shocked to hear this, but Ohio State and Georgia have the best players on the field out here. And I do feel like that will still have, as Andy likes to say, travel. I think that will still have an impact, but I wonder if the new Alabama, if the new Georgia dynasties will manifest in teams that just make the playoff over and over again, not just win the national title.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think that these programs like Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, even teams like Florida and Miami, if they can get it back going, if they can just get off the schneid a little bit, I think those programs, Alabama, they're all going to have gallons of gas. Like they're going to have a couple of gallons of gas to get this thing going and to get where they want to go. It's just a matter of whether or not they're going to have that top gear when the time comes to get over the hump and actually make it happen come playoff time. And that's going to be really difficult. And I think it's going to be extremely difficult if some of these things get passed where they're going to play multiple conference championship games or do conference championship playoffs and stuff like that. I think that's the worst idea ever. And if that happens, then we're really talking about it being super tough to win a national championship. All of a sudden it goes from, hey, you got to be perfect during the regular season in the old days to now you've got to survive and just try to win by 1 point as many times as you can.
So let's talk about this year's Georgia team, because probably the most interesting thing is what didn't happen. Georgia has Carson Beck get hurt in the SEC championship game. Gunner Stockton comes in for him, starts the Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame. And then Georgia does not go into the portal and get a quarterback. They roll with Gunner Stockton. How clear was that when last season ended that he was going to be the guy? And what does that situation look like now?
Well, I would like to point out they tried. Fernando Mendoza was very much on the Christmas list. I think it was right around Christmas too. He was very much on the list. They wanted him. They liked him a lot. They were actually in pretty good shape there. But I think ultimately Indiana, and not just Indiana, but all the other schools recruiting him, kind of got into his head and said, hey, they get this, Gunner Stockton kid. If he looks good in the Sugar Bowl, you got no chance. And honestly, I've never been a Gunner guy. Like I'll say that up front, and I think I even told Gunner that when I was interviewing him at the Sugar Bowl. I was like, hey, I've kind of been critical, and I have. Like you hear all these, you guys have covered teams before. You hear great things about players in practice, and then they get a chance to play, and you're just kind of like, man, I don't see it. I don't get it. He comes in the SEC championship game. He didn't light the world on fire. He made one of the ugliest mistakes I think I've ever seen a quarterback make, just by throwing the ball right directly to a Texas guy out of panic. But the one thing that I was impressed with was the way he came in, engineered a touchdown drive, got Georgia the lead. Georgia won that game. And listen, Georgia was a second half team all year. There's odds are if Carson Beck was healthy, they were going to make a run in the second half anyway. But Gunner picked it up and ran with it, and he did a good job. I thought he was a bright spot in the Sugar Bowl. No run game, very poor pass protection with Monroe Freeling beat to death, and Georgia beat to death up front just in general. 7 of their top 9 offensive linemen were dinged up at different points in the year. I thought he actually played well, delivered a good deep ball, pushed the ball downfield, did the same thing in the G-Day game. So I feel a lot better about Gunner than I did, hearing good things about him in practice and not seeing it whenever he got a chance to play. But when you kind of boil it all down, I do think Georgia wanted to bring in some experienced competition with him. If Georgia had 2 Gunner Stocktons, just the exact same guy, I would have no question about their quarterback room. But now they're one snap away from playing somebody who's never played before, and you never want to be in that situation.
Yeah, and also too, you thought that Georgia was much better than you anticipated 2 years ago in Carson Beck's first year as a starter, and I think a lot of that has to do with what we're finding out about Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, right? Like in the NFL, those guys are lighting the world on fire. And last year, I think part of the reason why, at least from my perspective, Jake, that Georgia struggled was that they didn't have any explosive offensive weapons on the outside that you could know for a fact are going to change the game. They went out and they got a few guys this year that might be able to do that. How do you feel about their explosiveness on offense outside of Gunner? And do you think they have a chance to return to being more explosive offensively?
Yeah, I think they definitely got more depth and more guys that are natural for playing their position. I mean, listen, it's not going to go down in any sort of record books, and you're not going to find it in the encyclopedias that they sell going door to door or anything. But man, Ra Thomas getting in trouble and getting kicked off the team prior to the start of the season, combined with Colby Young also getting in trouble and getting basically suspended for the rest of the season, was a dagger for Georgia's receiving corps, because Georgia lost 2 experienced X receivers. Dylan Bell was going to go into the year as kind of the number 3 X receiver. He and Dylan Humphreys. Dylan Bell's an off the line of scrimmage. I don't want to call him a gadget guy, but he's a motion guy. You put him in motion, you fake jet sweeps to him, you throw him some screens, you push the ball downfield. He had to play X, and X is kind of your pure wide receiver position. That's your route runner, third down guy, commands respect from the defense. If you don't have a good X receiver, a strong X receiver, then you're not gonna be a very balanced receiving core. And I think that hurt Georgia. Well, now they've got Colby Young back. They've got Noah Thomas. They've got a couple of freshmen that I think are way more capable of playing that specific spot than a guy like Dylan Bell, who is a catch and run guy. So, now Dylan Bell can kind of slide to the slot. He can play, he can play flanker. He can play running back some. Like, he can move around. And I think that just makes Georgia's offense better. And you still have London Humphreys, and you have the 2 freshmen, C.J. Wiley and Talon Taylor. You got a healthy tight end group coming back, one that's very experienced and has fought some battles. So I do like what Georgia has from a pass catcher standpoint. I mean, they don't have anybody like Ladd and Brock, who I will point out in that 2023 season, I don't know that Georgia played more than 6 or 7 quarters with both of those guys healthy all year long. It was kind of staggered in and out with those guys being there. But they don't have that specific guy. But I love the depth of the group because Georgia has had some attrition at that spot in the past. And you look and there's size, there's speed, there's youth, there's playmaking ability. They check off a lot of boxes.
I'm going to step in for Ari because I know where he's going with this, because you didn't mention Zach Branch, and Ari,
thank you.
can never let go of a 5-star recruit.
That's an omission on my part. I whiffed on the guy. Yeah.
Well, but that's the question, because Zach Branch, as a return guy at USC, was very dynamic. As a receiver at USC, was not so dynamic. So is that a case of just the situation he was in, or will that change now that he's in a new situation?
Well, I can tell you that they're really excited about him. And they're excited about the way he came in and worked and kind of set the tone. Listen, I'm not a big Lincoln Riley guy. Like, I'm not a big beat up on Lincoln Riley guy, and I'm not a big like, hey, he's the best. I mean, there was a time when I thought that he was the best run game guy out there. Like, I thought that, man, this guy can scheme it up better than anybody. And obviously his success with quarterbacks is kind of speaks for itself. But running a program, when I hear something like, hey, Zach Branch comes into Georgia, he's working really hard. He's already put on 8 pounds of muscle, and he's certainly a different player than we really thought he was going to be. Like, he's actually a little bit of a physical presence out here, despite his shorter size. Like, I kind of wonder what's going on. Like how does that happen? But he had a good spring game for Georgia, even despite being banged up. Wanted to play. I think he had a groin or a hamstring injury, one or the other. But wanted to compete in the G-Day game. Wanted to get out there and kind of get his feet wet, and had a big catch and did some good stuff. One of the reasons. Sometimes you think of slot receivers as a dime a dozen. Like, that's kind of where you put your good receiver that's not great. But he is a guy that does bring some dynamics to that spot. Even with Dom Lovett being there last year and being a pretty good player, I think Zach Branch is just a different deal. And I'm interested to see how Georgia uses him, and really if he can catch the ball consistently, because Dylan Bell did it last year, Dom Lovett did it last year, and Arian Smith did it last year. And I know a lot of people will point, well, who was the receivers coach? It was James Coley. Brother, all of those guys, all 3 of them have had problems catching the ball in the past. That's just where Georgia's been. So I think they've done a good job of going out and getting more sure-handed dudes and guys that can catch it more consistently, because that was a big problem for them, especially in first halves of games.
I'm about to pass out, Andy. Like, just stop me from
stop Georgia up the rankings already.
Yeah, they're number 1 now. Yeah, if somebody was a 5-star, Jake, they're a 5-star forever in my head.
Okay,
it doesn't.
I see it. Yeah. And that's the expectation. I think. I mean, I think that Georgia fans are going to have that expectation too. They expect Zach Branch to come in here and generate touchdowns for them. They expect Zach Branch to come in here and generate explosives, catch and runs. And that's one of the reasons, we do a position week thing, where I do at Dawgs HQ, where I take each week position by position and I write, 5 stories. If it's a smaller group, only 4 stories, but I write 5 stories on each position. And I got to the receivers, and one of my bold predictions for the receivers was I think Zach Branch leads the team in touchdowns. And I think it's because he can get them running, he can get them catching it and running, he can get them by getting over the top. And Georgia loves to use those diminutive slot receivers, the quick and fast, but mainly quick down there to create separation types of guys to create touchdowns. And I think that's the kind of weapon he's going to be for Georgia. One of the reasons I didn't bring him up when I was talking receivers a minute ago is because I just kind of see him as an offensive weapon. Because of his return skills and things like that. I think you're going to see Georgia work really hard just to get him the football in easy ways so that they can kind of create some value at that position.
If he turns into being a jack of all trades touchdown generator, which I think is a good way to put it, but he is an explosive person that is going to score or change every game they play. I'm not being funny here. It changes my entire expectation of what Georgia's ceiling as a program is next year, or team is next year.
And one thing I'll talk about here that doesn't get a lot of attention, and it shouldn't. It's not that exciting. One thing Georgia does as well as anybody, and they've had a little bit of trouble doing it, especially over the last year and a half, is they create room for their punt returners. They create. I mean, like I saw Mecole Hardman, who wasn't the best in the world at catching it, all right, to begin with, but he also wasn't really a make the first guy miss type. But man, they created room for him consistently. Mekhi Muse is another one, a former walk-on guy that ended up being a force for Georgia as a punt returner. You look down the line, they've had some guys that have done a really good job at the spot, and it's really been because of how hard they work to create. Urban Meyer used to do it both at Florida and Ohio State, kind of the way he treated special teams, and Kirby Smart tries to treat them the same way. I would expect there to be kind of a little bit of a renaissance for Zach Branch as a punt returner, because I know last year he kind of focused on kick returning as the season went on and actually got better as a kick returner and was less of an issue, less of a force at punt returner. So I know special teams aren't really excited, but I think that's an underrated way that Georgia's going to be able to create some hidden yardage.
Jake, how about the protection for Gunner Stockton? Because you mentioned it earlier in the show, but Georgia's offensive line was banged up pretty much all last season. It was not a case where they would trot out the same five guys who were awesome. They had good players, but it was a lot of mix and match. How about this year?
Yeah, I saw where ESPN, someone posted on our board where they had a lineup consistency kind of rating, and every other team in the playoffs was 44th or better, and Georgia was 99. So that kind of nails home the injuries, and most of them, again, you talk about depth on the O-line. If you've got 9 offensive linemen you trust, I don't care who you are, you're feeling really good going into the season. Like every team in the country is feeling great with 9 offensive linemen. If you tell that team they're going to have 7 of those 9 get hurt, I mean, they're just going to have to grit and grin. I mean, that's all they can do. I mean, there's nothing else that they can get. I mean, you're not going to have 15 offensive linemen or 12 that are ready to play. You just can't get that many guys going at one time. And listen, if they have that many again this year, it's going to be worse because they don't have as much depth as they did last year. But I love the talent that they have at that spot. One of the things that's been kind of overlooked was Ernest Green, who was the left tackle in 2023 and did a phenomenal job, especially the last 3 quarters of the season. Got started a little bit slow, had a tough game, I think, at Auburn, but then got better as the year went along. Then, last year was terrible at times, and he had multiple injuries, had a big-time shoulder injury on his left arm that kind of kept him from playing left tackle effectively. I think he had like a soft tissue injury, lower body hamstring, groin, something like that also kind of affected him. He moved to right tackle when he was coming back, and the move to right tackle was actually a little bit of a fit for him. I was told that, when he came back for the 2023 season, he was coming off a 2022 year where he spent the entire time kind of on the shelf after having a back surgery. So they were working hard to get him ready to play left tackle because they loved his talent. They never really got a chance to look at him at right tackle or for him to spend some time there and see how he fit. Well, he worked there all spring. He worked there for most of the season once he got healthy, and they shelved him and allowed him to get healthy, and he kind of fell in and he looked natural there. Monroe Freeling's more natural on the left side. So if those 2 guys, I mean, we're talking about 2 elite recruits. We're talking about 2 top 50 overall prospects there trying to get those spots nailed down. If Georgia nails it down with those 2, they've got a lot of experience and a lot of football IQ on the interior there. And as always, a lot of beef. They've got a lot of big bodies that can move guys off the ball, but I think it starts with those bookends.
Now, when you think about Georgia football, you think about like just bone-breaking defense, right? What is your thought process for, how good their defensive side of the ball is going to be, and are they going to be a prototypical, make other opposing offenses want to go home type of defense?
The dog walk over at Dawgs HQ and its infinite wisdom, if you collective infinite wisdom. Somebody had a great point the other day. They said that Georgia's defense could be worse, but if it tackles better, if it simply just tackles, gets the guy on the ground better this year, it'll be statistically better. And if you go back and you watch, obviously, I don't think anybody should have done this, but if you watch the UMass game last year, I'm sorry, that wasn't worth watching for anybody. I don't care what you say. It was just ugly football. Georgia had a play in that game. They had a guy tackled in the backfield. He slips loose and goes for 60 yards. First play of the Georgia Tech game, same thing happens. That was kind of the norm for Georgia at times last year. They tackled extremely poorly. Especially up near the line of scrimmage. and they didn't finish plays. And I honestly think that was the difference between Georgia against everybody else and Georgia against Texas, and really Clemson too. Georgia played 2 playoff teams and dominated them between Texas and Clemson, just tore them apart defensively because of how well they tackled and how well they got after the quarterback. And then they were up and down. And I think that was the focus this offseason for that in the offense, but more so, in my opinion, the defense was why Kirby Smart made such a big deal about getting players to play and reach for the standard, because they just want it, and try to get players motivated to play with passion, to play with energy, and to do the fundamental things correctly. And that's how I look at Georgia's defense. Like, you lose Jalen Walker and Mykel Williams and Malachi Starks, 3 first-round guys. That's not easy to replace. They're not going to replace those guys. But they've got a lot of talent coming back, and a lot of players, a lot of veteran players that are coming into what I would say contract year. C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, they're going to be juniors. K.J. Bolden's going to be a sophomore. He was arguably Georgia's most consistent defensive back last year. Dalen Everett's coming into his senior year and was the guy that got better as the year went on last year. So I think they're going to be really good defensively. I do have some concerns over rushing the passer, and I think Elo Madozi, the transfer from Army, is going to help them there. Been some good returns out of him already, just in terms of motor and work ethic. But they're going to be young at some spots, and they're going to be veterans at some key spots. And I wonder how that's going to pay off for them. They're going to need the same thing, though, as the offense needs. They're going to need to stay healthy up front, because they're not super deep.
And it seems like the last couple of years, they've not had the aliens on the interior D line that they had. And look, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, these are not guys who come along all the time. And it's a luxury to have them both on the same team at the same time. But are there maybe some guys in the pipeline or guys like Jordan Hall's been hurt? We've not seen like a fully healthy season out of him. Are there guys who can become a difference maker on the interior?
Yeah, Nazir Stackhouse and Warren Brinson were really good players, like really solid players. They played at Georgia forever. If I'm not mistaken, I think they came in 2020. They never redshirted, but they had 5 years, and they played a ton of snaps at Georgia, and they did a really good job. Now, I say that while also acknowledging that Christian Miller and Jordan Hall and Xavier McLeod are all more talented guys. The guy that I'm really watching is Xavier McLeod, because as the year wore on, he was hurt to start the season, and then he kind of started to get into a little bit of a groove. I think he had another little kind of setback. But if you flip on the SEC championship game and you just look at number 94, you see a guy that's kind of tossing some dudes around, and we're talking about a Texas offensive line that was pretty formidable, and he was tossing guys around in the run game, crossing face. Very, very good football player. And I think that he's got some big time potential there, if not to be the star, to be the guy that opens it up more for guys like like Joseph Jonah Ajanye, who's a redshirt freshman, former 5-star prospect. Want to talk about aliens? We're talking about a guy like that. Like, we're talking about a guy that actually talks to his teammates about how freakish his athleticism is. Like, he's not, and he does, and apparently does it in such a way that he endears himself. There was a press conference from Jordan Hall this past year. If you haven't seen it, it was hilarious. But talked about his freakish genetics and how talented he is. It's really funny. But Elijah Griffin's a very young player that's there. But ultimately, you're going to boil it down to the veterans, and that's going to be Christian Miller. It's going to be Jordan Hall. It's going to be Xavier McLeod. And I have high expectations for those guys. For Georgia, for me, it kind of moves out towards the defensive end and the edge spots that I'm worried more about, because I think they're going to have a good core on the interior and some young guys ready to do some big things. But can they sustain at defensive end and outside linebacker like they have in the past? Because that's where you lost Damon Wilson and Samuel Mpemba to the portal. That's where you lost Jalen Carter and Tyrone Ingram-Dawkins and Mykel Williams to the NFL. That's a lot of bodies to lose when you're talking about and Chaz Chambliss as well, tied for the team lead in sacks.
I just did a Google image search on Joseph Jonah Ajanye. He looks like he was created in a lab.
He does. He does. And the crazy thing, he's going into his second year at Georgia. He turns 19 in November.
Wow.
Yeah, he'll turn 19 in November. He turned 18 in he was 17. He hasn't played a snap yet as an 18-year-old. He had played all of his snaps at Georgia last year as a 17-year-old before he got hurt.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's the alien lab, right? Like, that's what you do. That's what the best programs do. Jake, let's just get to it now. What are reasonable expectations for what this Georgia team is going to do this year?
Yeah, I don't see this team. I could see this team missing the playoffs. Like I certainly could. Like I don't know that I don't think I would bet on that, but I could see this team missing the playoffs just because the schedule is pretty hard. You know, I'm a big Austin Simmons fan, and I think Georgia's going to have their hands full with Ole Miss whenever they come into Athens and some of the talent that Ole Miss brings back. You know, but again, so many of their tough games that you know, listen, they fought through that schedule last year with a marquee road game every single month of the season, and they found a way to go 10-2 and get in the playoffs. So I would expect them to do that again this year. You know, they're going to get. They got to get through Tennessee early on the road. They got to get through an early night game at Auburn. You know, there in early October. It still doesn't feel right for Georgia Auburn to be in October. It needs to be in November, but whatever. And then, you know, Alabama at home for the first time since 2015. You know, Texas and Athens, I think maybe for the first time ever. You know, there are some ways that Georgia could fall, but if you look at the road schedule, it's nowhere near as difficult as it was last year. And is this the year that Georgia falls at home? They haven't fallen at home since 2019, since Will Muschamp in South Carolina took it to them in one of the ugliest games I've ever covered. So I think that this team should make the playoffs. I think the SEC championship game is kind of up for grabs based on how everything works now. There's no winning the East anymore. So last year Georgia got in because Oklahoma beat Alabama. If Alabama takes care of business, Georgia doesn't get in, and Georgia still makes the playoff. But yeah, I certainly see Georgia, you know, being a team that can challenge for the playoff and ultimately challenge for the SEC championship game if it can stay healthy. I think staying healthy is the important part. They're not quite as built to handle the injuries that they had last year right now.
You know, what's crazy is that you go through an entire schedule, only have 3 true road games in a year. I don't know if I've ever seen that.
Well, the Georgia Tech game got moved down the street to Mercedes-Benz is why.
Yeah. But I mean,
Georgia's got a way worse record. Georgia's got a way worse record in Mercedes-Benz Stadium than they do Bobby Dodd. They haven't lost. They haven't lost at Bobby Dodd since '99.
Wow.
Crazy.
Yeah, Y2K came and went since the last time Georgia lost at Bobby Dodd.
I would say there's some ghosts in Mercedes-Benz for the Bulldogs. So.
Well, it really just for Alabama. I think the only team Georgia's lost to other than Alabama in Mercedes-Benz Stadium is LSU, and they lost to the 2019 LSU juggernaut. So
that's right. Well, I am fascinated to see what this team can do because it is like we keep saying, good, consistently good can be boring sometimes. But it actually sounds like it's not going to be a boring Georgia season. So I am excited to see what these guys look like. And Ari's revising his expectations with that Zach Branch
I think
evaluation.
That these types of interviews, and I really want to appreciate or say thank you and appreciate Jake for being so honest about this. But if Georgia isn't peak Georgia, that's still a very good team that can contend for a playoff spot in a deep run. But if peak Georgia's not here, peak Alabama's not there, peak Ohio State's not there, this is the illustration of why this season's going to be so entertaining. Because the non-peak versions of those three teams certainly could still win the national title, but it opens the door for so many other teams that are also very good for their standard who might not get blown off the field when they play the boogeyman at the end of the year, which is why there are, in my opinion, 12 to 14 different teams that could conceivably win it this year.
I think it's the year we're going to see a couple of 3-loss at-larges, like not necessarily winning the conference or anything, because, you know, you talk about that, Ari. Okay, you get Ohio State to October, November, maybe they lose a couple of games early. Some, you know, a 1-loss team, a 2-loss team is going to roll in, and Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, they're gonna knock somebody off. They're gonna ruin somebody, even if they're not quite what they want to be. They're going to ruin somebody's season. They're going to hurt somebody there at the end of the year in such a way that there's going to be some choices to be made at that point. And I certainly, again, I definitely think Georgia has the talent to go through and win 11 out of 12 or 10 out of 12 and make the playoff in the same scenarios that we saw last year. But, you know, to your point, it's not just Georgia that's the one that's like, hey, they're going to be really good or they're going to be good enough. there's a lot of teams you're saying that about. I'm saying it about Oregon, right? I think Oregon's kind of in the same boat. Like, I mean, I think there's a lot of teams out there.
I think you're saying it for everybody.
Yeah.
Who's not in that conversation?
And that's great. That as the viewer, that's great. On the dog walk,
it was a lot of fun last year. It was a lot of fun last year. And I tell you, my one key to this season that I'm really looking for, because I thought the home atmosphere last year was a bigger advantage than we've ever seen in college football for an entire season across the board. I'm not saying all the home teams won, but across the board, it seemed like, go all the way to Ole Miss at Florida, right? Like, for everybody, it seemed like the home dogs just ruled. And the home team had such a big advantage. It had a huge advantage in the playoffs. None of those games were even close. So is the home atmosphere going to be that big of a deal again this year? And if it is, I really like Georgia's chances.
Well, especially the most interesting Georgia home schedule in a billion years coming up now.
No question. Can't wait for it. I mean, it sucks that they put us in that weird press box now. We got to watch our second season, that weird press box.
You're so spoiled with the greatest press box on earth, which was essentially the mezzanine open air. It's just gorgeous.
We had it. Now we're like a ring on Saturn. Like we're up there on the I'm up there, looking at the moon. We're a million miles. We're as high as you can get in the stadium. Like there's no get. It's almost like watching a game in the Superdome at Mercedes-Benz in New Orleans, except they move you to the corner.
One quick aside. Two things. One, the highest press box I've ever been in is the one in Vegas. The new T. What's it?
I don't even know what the name of. Yeah,
Allegiant Stadium. Yeah.
It's really, really high. I remember I was getting sick up there in the press box watching USC.
You were getting sick because you knew you were going to have to pay a bet off because USC was losing to Utah.
What do you think makes the best press box? Is it view? Is it space? Is it internet? Or is it food?
Oh my God, it's really all of them. But at the end of the day, it's view. Where can I effectively watch a good game? Now the best press box in America is in Atlanta. Is Georgia Tech. That's a perfect press box. It's open air. It's on the 50-yard line, and it's right there. Like, there's no better place if you want to watch a game. It's a club level 50-yard line seat to watch a football game, and it's the best press box in America in terms of where to watch. I'll take a great 50-yard line view club level over anything else. And we used to have that at Georgia. Now I think it costs you about $100,000 a year to set where
I was going to say, I don't blame any of these people for doing this, by the way. We weren't paying for those tickets, and somebody else is willing to pay a lot. So I understand, and I'm so grateful they let us in somewhere. But yeah, the old Georgia, because it was Georgia, Alabama had it too, Auburn had it too, and Kentucky had it. I think all of them have changed it since. Yeah. But had the double-decker stadiums, and in that middle strip, the press box was just the area between the 30s, and it was open air, and it was glorious. And
well, if you guys want to come to Athens and see our brand new press box there, I'll buy you a meal while we're up there. And
what's funny is even high up at Sanford Stadium is not actually that high up considering how deep it's dug into the ground. So.
Yeah, I mean, you can almost walk out the back door, but in terms of where it's at from the field, oh my God, it's forever and a day. That Georgia Tech game last year, watching the photographers go one end to the other. I mean, we were all pacing around the press box because we were hurting from sitting down so long. So that was nice to actually have a new closed press box.
We got to get Ari to Athens for a game. He's never been to a game at Sanford Stadium, so we got to fix that. And yes, Jake, lots of fine dining options in Athens. So I have a whole list. So Jake, thank you so much. Tomorrow, on the first day of the On3 Rivals Partnership, we're joined by one of our new friends. Well, he's one of our old friends, but now we get to work with him. Larry Williams of Tiger Illustrated, talking Clemson, another potential national title contender. We'll talk to you tomorrow.